Hey, what's up, y'all? My name is Dennis Heil, and I am diagnosed with type 2 bipolar disorder with severe depression and high functioning autism. I've been living with bipolar disorder for over 30 years, 15 of which I spent undiagnosed. In 2009, I experienced a depressive psychotic break that led to my diagnosis of type 2 bipolar disorder. I would be diagnosed with autism a few years later. In my podcast, Bluntly Bipolar, I'm going to share with you my experiences and the hard lessons I've learned trying to find some peace and happiness in my life. I hope that by sharing my experiences, others can avoid learning these lessons the hard way. I'm not a mental health professional. All I am is a mental patient with a microphone. Listener discretion is advised. This is what Voice Memo Guy can teach us about boundaries. Have you heard of Voice Memo Guy? It was a recording that went around on social media of a guy who sent a voice memo to a woman he had gone out on a date with once. He attempted to initiate sex, and she said she didn't know. Then she invited him over to her house, and he responded with a voice memo. That voice memo essentially said, "Hey, I'm looking for a sexual relationship. If that's not something you're interested in and that's not going to happen when I come over, then I don't think we should get together anymore." In response, she put that memo out to the internet, and it appears to have split people into two camps. One camp believes he did the right thing because he was honest about his needs and expectations. The other camp believes that what he did was coercive. Now, personally, I find many of these opinions lacking, and I thought this would be an excellent learning device about boundaries. Now, I'm not bringing this up because I'm morally superior or have all the answers, but what I am is a strange guy who's done strange things with strange people that requires informed consent and safe words to ensure everyone stays safe, happy, and healthy for over 30 years now. So if talk of kink or sex bothers you, I would encourage you to skip this episode. However, it does very much relate to mental health, boundaries, and consent. Now, many people think of boundaries as walls and enforcing those boundaries as punishments for pushing past that wall. I prefer to think of them more like a filter instead. You know, a filter or a boundary says that you can have access to me in this specific way under these specific conditions. Then the other person can make an informed decision on whether or not they want to abide by those rules to have that access to you. A boundary is not a punishment because you are deciding how you want to allow another person to treat you and giving them the freedom to decide if they want to comply or not. Much of the dialogue I've seen surrounding the voice memo guy doesn't seem to have a solid understanding of boundaries or consent. I can tell because of their takes on consent. There's a common piece of advice that goes something like, anything other than an enthusiastic yes is a no. And that works fine in most situations. However, if you want to explore and do things you haven't done before, it is impossible for you to give an informed, enthusiastic yes because you don't know how you're going to feel during the act. Not only that, people can and do revoke their enthusiastic yes in the heat of the moment when they find that what they imagine doesn't align with the reality. Now, being intellectually aware of and understanding an act is not the same thing as experiencing it. Reading about something or watching about it in a video is not going to cause emotional trauma, nerve damage, broken bones, or worse. You can watch it, you can read about it and find an idea exciting, but that doesn't mean you'll like it when you do it. If that turns out to be the case, then you can and should revoke your consent right there in the middle of the act. Everyone is well within their rights to do that. If you're experimenting with someone, you can't know if they're going to remain consensual through the duration of the act. That's the way it works to keep people safe. There's no such thing as a blanket pre-consent that carries through the duration of an act either. If someone revokes consent and you continue as though they didn't, you've crossed the line into sexual assault. Now, with that understanding, how do we work around that so everyone stays safe, happy, and healthy? Now, kinky folks use safe words or signals. Personally, I'm a fan of the stoplight system. Red, yellow, and green. Red means something is wrong. Hard stop. I'm revoking consent. Yellow means slow down or I'm reaching my limit. Give me a chance to recover. Yellow communicates to a dominant that they need to reduce the intensity and give their partner a little chance to recover. Green is generally not used unless the dominant needs to check in with their submissive. You clearly say something like check in, and if the submissive partner is okay, they reply with green. That's important because sometimes people will drift into subspace from all the happy chemicals their brain is producing, and they can become non-responsive. Injuries can happen if you're not able to communicate clearly, and a safe word makes things clear and is easy to remember in the heat of the moment. Now, in the context of Voice Memo Guy, their interaction was nowhere near clear enough to understand the full context of the situation. You go out with someone once and they don't know if they want to have sex. However, for the next date, they're inviting you to their apartment, house. To me, that's a mixed signal. I would have been asking questions too, because what are the expectations of that second date? Because for a lot of people, they perceive an invitation to someone's house for a date as setting the stage for an intimate encounter. But this woman stated she didn't know if that's what she wanted or not. Looking for clarity in the situation is the only reasonable answer if he's trying to respect her boundaries while also meeting his own needs. Now, some have said this was coercive because he gave an ultimatum. I disagree and I agree. I disagree that it was coercive because there was really no other way he could have made that situation more comfortable for her. They weren't alone in a bedroom. He wasn't whining about blue balls. He sent her a voice memo which she could process at her own pace, respond to on her own time, and make an informed decision about the situation in the safety of her own privacy. But was it an ultimatum? Also, yes, because all boundaries are. Boundaries say, if this condition is not met, then I'm not going to keep interacting in this relationship in the way that I have laid out. That's not manipulation. That's just how boundaries work. A boundary isn't a boundary unless you're willing to follow through on a consequence. Now, the consequence of a healthy boundary is some kind of separation, usually, not compliance. Manipulators want compliance, whereas healthy people are fine with letting others go who do not want to pass their filter. You make room for the people that will. That man is not entitled to a sexual relationship with that woman or anyone. However, she's also not entitled to a friendship with that man or a lengthy courting process if that's not what he wants. Neither of them is wrong for having those needs and desires. However, if the filters don't align, that just means you're not compatible and you go your separate ways. It doesn't have to be a huge issue if you don't cling to expectations. You just go, all right, this person isn't right for me, so I'm moving on. But too many people cling. They don't let those random connections go when they aren't meant to be there. You're not going to align with everyone in life, and that's okay. You let that person go and you make room for the people who are going to align with your needs and desires. This perspective is often rooted in unrealistic expectations. Not everyone you cross paths with is going to be a friend, best friend, or lover. Sometimes you just bump into people once or twice, realize you don't vibe well, and move away from each other. To me, that's all the situation seemed like. He clearly expressed his own desires and expectations. She clearly didn't want that, so they part ways and they move on. One thing that healthy kink gets right is that informed consent is an ongoing conversation to ensure that everyone is safe. In the kink world, an I don't know needs to be fully talked about and understood. There should be no gray areas, because a gray area is where harm happens. You have to ask questions to understand your partner's limitations if you're at all unclear. And that can lead to a lot of uncomfortable conversations. But uncomfortable conversations are a much better alternative to sexually assaulting someone. Why don't you know? Are you curious but scared? Is it something that you're not sure you want to do, but you'll do it for your partner? Are you nervous, but you don't know what to expect or how to handle it? Or are you just afraid of saying no because other people have shamed you or made you feel bad about having boundaries? Did someone pressure you past your safe word or keep going when you revoked consent? There could be a lot of nuance and trauma behind an I don't know. And you have to have the ability to have those uncomfortable conversations. Seeking clarification is absolutely mandatory. Why is it absolutely mandatory? Because if that person doesn't give their consent or revokes their consent during the act, you are now sexually assaulting them. There is no gray area in that. Now, there are a lot of unhealthy people in the kink world who will claim that there is gray area, and no, they're just wrong. If they don't consent to it, or they haven't outlined the expectations of consent surrounding it, then it's off limits. If you're experimenting with someone, then the yellow light becomes a safety barrier for everyone involved. It's safety for the submissive and preserves their bodily autonomy. It's safety for the dominant to not sexually assault or abuse someone. Red, of course, is the immediate revocation of consent that says, stop now. Pushing harder or stepping over those boundaries can put you in legally actionable territory. But then you have to wonder, well, what if they don't know? What if they can't decide or won't communicate? Well, then you pass on doing anything with that person. There are plenty of unhealthy people in the kink world on both sides. Not everyone you meet is someone you should entertain, and that's just as true in the vanilla world, too. In fact, looking back on it, I feel like my vanilla connections I've had have always been worse because of the lack of communication. It's just not as essential, and it really should be. Now, the other factor that is included in all this is an entitlement that often exists towards women's bodies and towards men's time and attention. You have the obvious, him looking for a sexual partner may not be going about it the most healthy of ways. But on the other side of the coin, you have friendship or long courtship, and friendship is work. You have to make an effort to build and maintain friendships with other people. If you're someone who's only looking for a romantic or physical connection, you may not be interested in developing platonic friendships because you only have so much energy. That energy that you have, you want to put toward finding the right romantic connection. Now, the same thing is true for trying to stay friends after a breakup. A lot of people seem to do this to try to soothe some of their own guilt about the breakup. But as far as I can tell from my own experiences and what I've seen in my life, it usually just makes things worse for the person who was dumped. They need to put out the energy to try to maintain a friendship while dealing with the hurt from the loss of the relationship with that person. Yep, they're still right there. Their presence a constant reminder of what was lost. It's not fun and it's not easy. Of course, not every situation is like that. It just seems that way to me more often than not. Now, personally, in retrospect, it would have been better for everyone involved if I had healthy boundaries and stopped talking to former partners I tried to stay friends with for a while. Give those emotions time to die off, rest, recover, and heal. Trying to stay friends is like continuously reopening a wound that just kept bleeding and bleeding because of it. Sometimes it delayed healing for a long time. My lack of boundaries as a young man prolonged my own suffering and heartbreak. In some cases, total distance wouldn't work, like if you're trying to co-parent with someone. There's only so much distance you can have. However, that's where our boundaries enter the picture. You may set boundaries like, I don't want to discuss our previous relationship or entertain any kind of reminiscing. You are well within your rights to set about any boundary you want, and it's up to the person to decide if they want to respect those restrictions to engage with you. You are essentially allowing other people to filter themselves out of your life. Or to put it in another context, let's say you're an adult with a difficult relationship with your mom. You may set a boundary like, I'm not going to continue a conversation with you if you're going to belittle or abuse me. Then she can make a choice on whether or not she wants to interact with you based on that. It may result in you hanging up on her in the middle of a phone call if she starts making passive-aggressive jabs at you. And some would say, well, she's your mother. And granted, yes, but on the other hand, if she's your mother, why would she be belittling and abusing you? That isn't something that should be acceptable from anyone. And in the world of bipolar disorder, sometimes it becomes necessary for our loved ones to set down boundaries. Like, we can't stay together if you won't comply with treatment, or you can't stay here if you refuse to take your medication. A lot of people struggle with finding balance between compassion and enabling behavior. Boundaries help to bridge that gap and establish balance. Now, as a mentally ill person myself, I find these kinds of boundaries to be helpful in guiding my own decisions too. Like, if you're struggling to stay compliant with your meds because you just really don't want to take them, it can make a difference to know it may cost you where you live or a relationship. Granted, these are usually last-ditch efforts when it comes to trying to maintain that kind of connection. Some people just don't want to comply, even though their mental illness is destructive to both of them and the people around them. It's not compassionate to put yourself through trauma or have your own life turned inside out because of a destructive person. Not only that, but you may end up depriving them of the realization that they need to change. If they see you won't entertain certain behavior, that may spur them to realize, hey, I really need to change. How often do you hear that story in substance abuse recovery? Some people have to hit a rock bottom before they can decide they want to be better, and that often includes losing important relationships. That may be the reason that they finally decide to talk to a doctor or start taking therapy seriously. Not to mention, it preserves your resources in the event that they do start making progress. You'll be in a better position to help them by protecting yourself and your space with healthy boundaries. Generally speaking, you want to be fully aware of your boundaries and why you have them. However, it's not always worthwhile to talk about them in depth with people who require more serious boundaries. For example, let's go back to the boundaries with mom scenario. If mom is manipulative, she may just want to better understand your boundaries so she can try to find a way around them. If someone is fishing for information and they don't appear to have good intentions, you're usually better off not engaging with them about it. Just state your boundary plainly and enforce the outcome that you've determined will come from violating it. However, sometimes discussion needs to happen because the other person may not be entirely clear on what they did wrong. I've ran into this issue a few times because of my high-functioning autism. I felt like I was missing some kind of social context that was important for the situation, and that was interpreted as hostility and manipulation because I just didn't understand at the time. It's important to keep in mind that sometimes people aren't malicious, they just aren't socially aware or all that socially competent. Which honestly, Voice Memo Guy kind of seems socially oblivious. But you can determine that by their willingness to abide by your boundary. If they start trying to negotiate your boundary, that's generally not a good sign. Say that the boundary is not up for debate and move forward with the consequences if they keep pushing. Well-meaning people will typically leave it alone or just ask clarifying questions, in my experience. They won't be looking for a way around it. Boundaries are an essential part of protecting your peace and improving your mental health. They serve as effective filters, communicating to other people that you can have access to me in these specific ways by following these specific rules. No one is entitled to anything more or less than that. In the situation with Voice Memo Guy, based on the information that's publicly available, to me it seems like they were both right. They just weren't compatible. Their desires and expectations just didn't align, and that's okay. There are 4 billion other people out there who you may potentially align with, or 8 billion if you happen to be bisexual. You should be selective about who you give your valuable time to because you don't get more of it. You only get 24 hours in your day. Don't waste it on people who you don't align with. Your life will be much happier and more peaceful for it. Thank you for your time. Don't forget to hit follow and share this with someone you think it might help. Please consider leaving an honest rating and review on your platform of choice. It'll help me reach more people.